I work here. Here's my ID.
Step out from behind the counter, now.
I work here. Here's my ID.
That doesn't prove anything. You don't belong back there.
He's the pharmacist.
Stay out of it. Turn around.
Officer Daniels had no clue what he'd just stepped into. Over the next 18 minutes, he would unlawfully arrest a business owner. He would brush off multiple witnesses. He would set off a federal lawsuit that would end up costing his city $4.3 million. The pharmacist he was threatening carried credentials he never even requested. Dr. Marcus Waters wasn't merely a pharmacist. He was a doctor of pharmacy with 12 years of hands-on experience. He was board certified across 3 specialties. He had opened this community pharmacy after working at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He had served over 15,000 patients in this mostly black neighborhood. He had 0 complaints on his record, and the security cameras were recording everything. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been treated unfairly by someone in power? Drop your answer in the comments. But Officer Daniels never asked, he just assumed. Dr. Marcus Isaiah Waters is the owner and head pharmacist of Waters Community Pharmacy. He graduated in the top 5% from University of Maryland School of Pharmacy in 2011. He completed his residency at Johns Hopkins Hospital. He worked in hospital pharmacy for 8 years before opening his own practice. He's board certified in 3 areas: pharmacotherapy, ambulatory care, and geriatric pharmacy. He's licensed to give immunizations and prescribe certain medications. He's been an expert witness in 3 pharmaceutical cases. He published research on medication access in underserved communities. He knows pharmacy law better than most lawyers. In 2020, Dr. Waters opened his pharmacy in East Baltimore, the same neighborhood where he grew up. He accepts Medicaid, he offers payment plans. He personally delivers medications to elderly patients. He employs 6 staff members, all from the local community. On this Tuesday afternoon in March 2023, Dr. Waters was just trying to fill prescriptions. He was serving his patients. He had no idea his Tuesday was about to become a national news story. Officer Ryan Daniels had a different kind of reputation in East Baltimore. Daniels was 34. He'd been with the Baltimore Police Department for 9 years. He was a patrol officer, but Internal Affairs had 11 complaints against him in 7 years. 8 involved black civilians. 7 were for unnecessary use of authority. None resulted in discipline. In May 2019, he detained a black teenager outside a convenience store. He said the teen matched a description. The suspect was 6 inches shorter and 40 pounds heavier. The complaint was dismissed. In November 2020, he pulled over a black businessman in a luxury car. He demanded proof of ownership. He insisted the car was stolen. The registration matched the driver's license perfectly. The complaint was dismissed. In August 2022, he entered this same pharmacy. He questioned Dr. Waters' credentials. He left when a pharmacy tech called a supervisor. Dr. Waters didn't file a complaint. He didn't want trouble. The pharmacy staff called Daniels badge boy. They'd seen him circle the block 4 times in 2 months, always slowing down, always staring through the windows. This time something was different. This time Daniels didn't just stare. This time he walked in with a purpose, and this time Dr. Waters wasn't going to let it slide. Type accountability in the comments if you think police officers should face consequences for repeated complaints. It was Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. The time was 2:47 p.m. Waters Community Pharmacy sits on East Monument Street in East Baltimore. It's a modest corner pharmacy with bright blue signs. Security cameras are visible at the entrance. The interior is clean and organized. The pharmacy counter sits at the back. There's a waiting area with 6 chairs, a blood pressure station near the window. It was a normal mid-afternoon. The prescription printer hummed softly. A TV in the waiting area played local news. The smell of hand sanitizer filled the air. 3 customers were waiting. An elderly woman reading a magazine, a young mother with an infant, a middle-aged man on his phone. 2 staff members were working. Pharmacy technician Jessica Morale stood at the counter. She had been with Dr. Waters for 3 years. Pharmacy intern David Chen was organizing shelves. He was a local university student. Dr. Waters stood behind the pharmacy counter. He wore his white coat. He was reviewing prescriptions. At 2:47 p.m., the door chimed. Officer Daniels entered. He was 6'1", 210 pounds in full uniform. His hand stayed near his belt. Jessica immediately tensed. She recognized him from the August incident. Daniels didn't approach the counter. He stood in the doorway, scanning the room. If stories like this matter to you, hit subscribe. We post new cases every week. Who's in charge here? Dr. Waters looked up. Can I help you, officer? Daniels walked slowly to the counter. I asked, who's in charge? I'm the owner, Dr. Marcus Waters. What can I do for you? Jessica's hand moved to her pee-hone. Dr. Waters had trained all his staff. If anything ever feels wrong, you document it. We received a report of suspicious activity, Daniel said. Controlled substances being given out irregularly. From whom? What specific concern? That's not your concern. I need to see your records now, officer. Those are protected health records. Dr. Waters said, I can't release them without proper permission, a warrant, subpoena, or written patient consent. I don't need a warrant. This is a lawful investigation. Then you'll need to contact the Maryland Board of Pharmacy. They handle pharmacy inspections. I'm happy to cooperate through proper channels. Daniels raised his voice. I'm not asking again. Dr. Waters stayed calm. And I'm not refusing to cooperate. I'm explaining the legal process. Daniels leaned over the counter. You people always make everything difficult. Dr. Waters looked him in the eye. What people? Business owners who think they're above the law. I think I know the law. Pharmacy law, which you're currently asking me to break. Show me your pharmacy license. Prove you're actually qualified to run this place. Dr. Waters pointed to the wall. It's displayed right there as legally required. Maryland License PH18742. It expires in 2025. How do I know that's yours? Because my name is on it, and on the door, and on the sign outside, and on my business license, and on the DEA registration behind the counter. You're being hostile and uncooperative. That's suspicious behavior. I'm being professional. You're being invasive. Step out from behind that counter. I need to verify your identity. Officer, I'm in the middle of filling prescriptions. I'm not stepping anywhere. Mrs. Freeman stood up. She was 71 years old. Young man, Dr. Waters is a good man. He takes care of this whole neighborhood. Ma'am, sit down, Daniel said. Robert Mitchell spoke next. I've been coming here 2 years. Never seen anything suspicious except you harassing him. Everyone stay out of this. Daniels moved around the counter toward the pharmacy area. Dr. Waters stepped sideways, blocking access. You cannot come back here. This is a restricted area. I'm conducting an investigation. No, you're trespassing. Daniels reached for his handcuffs. Turn around now. What Officer Daniels didn't know was that Dr. Waters had been preparing for exactly this moment for 8 months. Since the last time Daniels walked through that door, Daniels grabbed Dr. Waters' arm. You're under arrest for obstruction. Jessica, call Attorney Morrison now. You're not calling anyone's. Dr. Waters spoke clearly. I am invoking my right to legal counsel. Jessica pressed the button. Jessica hit the panic button under the counter. It sent a silent alarm to 2 places: Attorney Morrison's office and Baltimore Police Dispatch. The code meant wrongful detention. Dr. Waters stayed calm despite the handcuffs. Officer Daniels, you are violating Title 42 USC Section 1983, deprivation of rights under color of law. You have no probable cause. No warrant, no urgent circumstances. You are detaining a pharmacy owner during business hours without legal reason. You think knowing some legal terms scares me? I know more than terms. I know Maryland Code Health Occupations Article 12,313 on pharmacy inspections. I know HIPAA Regulations 45 CFR 164.502, and I know your badge number 4782. Every word you're saying is being recorded on 3 cameras with audio. Mrs. Gladys Freeman spoke up. She was a retired teacher. She had lived in this neighborhood for 40 years. I've watched this boy grow up. I mean, this doctor, he graduated top of his class. He came back here when he could have worked anywhere. This officer has been harassing him for months. I've seen it. Shanice Johnson was next. She was a nursing student and regular customer. Dr. Waters filled my baby's antibiotic prescription at 11 p.m. last month. She had a fever. No other pharmacy was open. He drove it to my house himself. Does that sound suspicious? David Chen, the pharmacy intern, stepped forward. This is the 3rd time this officer has targeted Dr. Waters. The first time he said the prescription volume was suspicious. The second time he questioned whether the pharmacy was a front. There's no investigation. This is harassment. 3 HD security cameras were recording the entrance, the pharmacy counter, the consultation room. Jessica had been recording on her phone since 2:49 p.m. before the arrest. Robert Mitchell started recording at 2:51 p.m. The pharmacy computer logs showed normal business. 82 prescriptions filled that day. 0 problems. The panic alarm had a timestamp. 2:53 p.m. At 2:54 p.m., attorney Sarah Morrison received the alarm. She's a civil rights attorney, former DOJ prosecutor. At 2:55 p.m., Morrison called Baltimore Police Dispatch. She identified herself. She demanded a supervisor. At 2:58 p.m., dispatch contacted Sergeant Luis Ramirez. He was a 14. Yay, our veteran. At 3:04 p.m. Ramirez arrived. Daniels, what's going on? Suspicious activity report. Subject refused to cooperate. What report? I checked dispatch. No call about this location. Anonymous tip. When? Earlier today. Daniels, did you log it? I was going to after I take the cuffs off now. A flicker of panic crossed Daniels' face. By now, Officer Daniels was starting to understand how badly he messed up, but it was too late. Attorney Morrison was already on speakerphone. The pharmacy security system had already uploaded the footage to cloud storage, and Mrs. Freeman had already posted Jessica's video to Facebook. Her caption read, "They're arresting Dr. Waters for being black in his own pharmacy. Let me know in the comments. Should officer complaint histories be public record?" Sergeant Luis Ramirez was a 14-year patrol supervisor with a professional reputation. Attorney Sarah Morrison arrived in person at 3:11 p.m. She had represented 4 similar cases before. Ramirez reviewed the security footage on the pharmacy computer. Dr. Waters gave him access. He checked Daniels' body camera. Daniels had forgotten to turn it on. That's a department policy violation. Ramirez interviewed the 3 customers separately. He checked dispatch logs. They confirmed no call about the pharmacy. He checked the Maryland Board of Pharmacy database. Waters' license was active. 0 complaints, 0 violations in 3 years. He reviewed Dr. Waters' DEA registration. He looked at the controlled substance logs. Perfect compliance. Daniels had claimed the prescription volume was suspicious. The reality, 82 prescriptions per day, is normal for a community pharmacy, serving over 3,000 patients. Daniels had claimed Dr. Waters was hostile and uncooperative. The footage showed Dr. Waters calmly explaining legal requirements. It showed Daniels getting louder and more aggressive. Daniels had claimed Dr. Waters refused to provide identification. The reality, Dr. Waters' license was clearly displayed on the wall. Daniels never actually asked for a photo ID. Dr. Waters on behalf of the Baltimore Police Department. I apologize. This should not have happened. Ramirez removed the handcuffs at 3:16 p.m. Dr. Waters had been in cuffs for 23 minutes. Daniels returned to the station. Report to the captain's office immediately. You're on desk duty pending investigation. Attorney Morrison served Daniels with a notice. She would file a federal civil rights lawsuit. Ramirez issued a criminal trespass warning to Daniels. He was banned from entering the pharmacy off duty. Daniels tried to defend himself. I was doing my job. He was suspicious. You're taking his side, he asked Ramirez. I'm your officer. Then desperation set in. This is being blown out of proportion. I'll apologize. We can settle this. Morrison stopped him. Officer Daniels stopped talking. Anything you say is being recorded. It will be used in federal court. Dr. Waters rubbed his wrists. Red marks were visible. Jessica was crying. She hugged Dr. Waters. The customers applauded Ramirez. They glared at Daniels. Dr. Waters' first words after being released. Is anyone's prescription delayed? Let me get back to work. He went back to filling prescriptions at 3:22 p.m. Ramirez escorted Daniels out at 3:24 p.m. But the consequences were just beginning. Someone had been recording. Actually, 5 people had been recording. And in 2023, you know what that means. Now here's what happened next. If you believe officers with repeated complaints should face consequences, hit that subscribe button right now. At 3:08 p.m., Mrs. Freeman uploaded a 4-minute video to Facebook. Her caption, "They're arresting Dr. Waters for being black in his own pharmacy." By 3:45 p.m., the video had 2,400 views and 340 shares in the local East Baltimore community. By 4:30 p.m., it hit 18,000 views. Jessica's phone video was uploaded to Twitter by a community activist. By 5:15 p.m., Baltimore Brew, a local news site, picked it up. 67,000 views across all platforms. By 6 p.m., the hashtag Justice for Dr. Waters was trending on local Twitter. By 7:30 p.m., local TV stations WB and WJZ arrived at the pharmacy for statements. By 9 p.m., national outlets covered it. The Root Bet News won. By midnight, the videos had 2.3 million views across TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Mrs. Freeman's original Facebook video got 847,000 views and 34,000 shares. On Twitter, Justice for Dr. Waters had 156,000 tweets. It was trending number 3 in Baltimore, number 47 nationally. On TikTok, 6 different videos combined for 1.1 million views. The comments were powerful. This is what systemic racism looks like. A black man with a doctorate gets arrested in his own business. That comment got 42,000 likes. I'm a white pharmacist. I've never been asked to prove my credentials by police, not once in 15 years. That got 38,000 likes. Dr. Waters delivered medicine to my grandmother at midnight during COT. His man is a hero. That comment got 19,000 likes. Local news, national news, everyone covered it. CNN ran a segment. MSNBC covered it. The Baltimore Sun wrote multiple articles. At 10:30 p.m., Baltimore police issued a statement. We are aware of an incident involving one of our officers and a local business owner. The matter is under internal investigation. The next morning, the Maryland Board of Pharmacy issued a statement. Dr. Marcus Waters holds an active, unrestricted pharmacy license with 0 violations. We support his right to operate his business free from harassment. Daniels deleted his personal social media accounts by 11 p.m. The Fraternal Order of Police tried to defend him. They issued a statement about officer safety concerns. Twitter users responded with 90% negative comments. 3 days later, Daniels made a decision that turned a viral moment into a federal case. He filed a counter-complaint. He accused Dr. Waters of assault. That's when attorney Morrison filed the lawsuit. Drop a comment if you think this officer deserved what came next. On March 17, 2023, attorney Sarah Morrison filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. She filed in U.S. District Court for Maryland. The plaintiff was Dr. Marcus Waters. The defendants were Officer Ryan Daniels, the Baltimore Police Department, and the City of Baltimore. The claims included deprivation of constitutional rights under color of law, unlawful seizure, and false arrest under the Fourth Amendment, racial discrimination under the 14th Amendment, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. During discovery, Daniels' pattern was uncovered. 11 complaints in 7 years, 8 involving black civilians. The department knew, but they never disciplined him. There were 3 prior incidents involving Dr. Waters specifically. Internal emails showed supervisors noted, "Daniels has a problem with that pharmacy." The evidence was overwhelming. 3 security camera angles with audio, 4 citizen cell phone videos. The body camera Daniels forgot to turn on. Dispatch logs proving no call about the pharmacy. 47 witness statements. Dr. Waters, medical exam, showed bruising and wrist abrasions. His blood pressure was elevated 6 hours after the arrest. In August 2023, the city tried to settle. They offered $150,000. No admission of wrongdoing. Dr. Waters refused. "This isn't about money, it's about accountability." In October 2023, the case went to mediation. In December 2023, they reached a settlement. The depositions revealed the department knew about Daniels' pattern. Wait until you hear the settlement amount. The total was $4.3 million. Dr. Waters received $2.8 million in compensatory damages. There were $1.2 million in punitive damages. Insurance wouldn't cover all of it. Daniels became personally liable for $400,000. Attorney fees added another $300,000. Daniels was banned from Waters Community Pharmacy for life. He was banned from alarmacies within a 5-millimeter radius. He had to attend 40 hours of bias training if he stayed in law enforcement. On December 15, 2023, Daniels was fired. The reasons? Failure to turn on his body camera, filing a false report, conducting an unlawful detention. The Fraternal Order of Police declined to appeal his termination. The Maryland Police Training Commission started decertification proceedings. His law enforcement career was over. He couldn't work as a cop in Maryland. He couldn't get hired in other states. No criminal charges were filed. The DA declined, citing not enough evidence of criminal intent, but there was a permanent injunction. Daniels couldn't contact Dr. Waters or any pharmacy staff. A 5-year restraining order was issued. In January 2024, Daniels issued a public statement through his attorney. "I apologize if my actions were misunderstood. I was attempting to do my duties as a law enforcement officer. It failed." The words "apologize if" made it worse. He used passive voice. He didn't acknowledge racial profiling. He framed himself as the victim. Dr. Waters held a press conference in January 2024. This was never about the money. This was about making sure no other black business owner is terrorized in their own place. The settlement holds the city accountable. But real change requires cultural transformation within law enforcement. But the story didn't end with,
Please, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them.
I work here. This is my car.
You don't belong back here. ID. Now.
My hospital badge is right here.
Those can be fake. Move. Now.
the first thing she noticed wasn't the siren. It was the silence. That strange, late-night hospital silence that only happens after a long shift, when the last visitors have gone home. The elevators sigh instead of chatter, and the parking lot feels like an empty hallway under the sky. Nia Thompson stepped out through the employee entrance with her tote bag digging into one shoulder, and her badge still clipped to her scrub top. like she'd forgotten it wasn't part of her skin. Her feet ached in that deep way that doesn't show up until you stop moving. 12 hours of beeping monitors. 12 hours of families asking the same terrified question in different voices. 12 hours of trying to keep a calm face while your body runs on caffeine and duty. She crossed the sidewalk toward the staff lot, breathing in cold air that smelled like damp asphalt and disinfectant drifting from the loading dock. Her car was where she always left it. Same corner, same row, under the same flickering light that never quite decided whether it wanted to work. Nia dug her keys out of her bag, and that's when headlights snapped on. Bright, sudden, like someone had aimed a spotlight at her life. A police cruiser rolled in, slow and deliberate, tires crunching over gravel. It didn't pass through. It stopped, angled, blocking the lane like a warning. Then the voice came, flat through a loudspeaker, like it belonged to a man who'd already decided the ending. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." Nia froze, not because she was guilty, because she recognized the tone. The kind of tone that turns ordinary into dangerous in a single sentence. Her hands lifted instinctively, palms open. I'm just getting in my car," she called back. A door opened, a boot hit the ground, and an officer walked toward her with the stiff posture of someone who believed control was the same thing as safety. This is the story of how a black nurse leaving a hospital after midnight was treated like a threat. How one officer's routine check turned into a public humiliation in a place she'd saved lives. And how a body camera captured enough to force a $1.5 million settlement that nobody expected, except the people who'd lived this pattern before. Before we go deeper, quick question. Where are you watching from? Drop your city, state, or country in the comments, because the unsettling part about stories like this is how familiar they feel in places that swear they're not like that. Now, back to that parking lot. Because the officer wasn't walking toward Nia like he was there to help. He was walking toward her like she was a problem. The hospital was called Mercy Ridge Medical Center, one of those regional facilities that served everyone from newborns to retirees, from highway accident victims to people who just needed stitches at 2 a.m. It wasn't glamorous. It was necessary. And Nia had spent the last 6 years making herself necessary inside those walls. She wasn't a new hire, she wasn't a visitor, she wasn't loitering. She was the nurse who caught sepsis before it turned into a funeral. The nurse who coached scared parents through breathing treatments. The nurse who stayed 10 minutes past her shift to hold an older man's hand because nobody else was there. Tonight had been brutal even by hospital standards. A pediatric asthma flare, a car wreck, a code blue that left the entire floor, wired, quiet, and shaky afterward. When Nia finally clocked out, she felt like her bones had been borrowed. All she wanted was her car, her seat heater, silence, and a shower that could wash the night off her skin. Instead, she got a cruiser. The officer stopped 5 feet away. White male, mid-30s. Clean uniform, a jaw that looked like it lived in permanent irritation. His nameplate read HARRIS. His body camera sat on his chest with a small blinking light, a witness that couldn't be intimidated. "Step back from the car," he repeated, voice sharper now. Nia did exactly what he said. She took 2 slow steps back and stayed under the lamp. "Officer," she said carefully, "I work here. I'm leaving my shift. This is my vehicle." Harris looked her up and down, not like a person, like a story he didn't trust. "Who said you could park here?" he asked. Nia blinked. "It's the employee lot," she said. "I'm an employee." He didn't acknowledge the badge clipped to her chest. He didn't glance at the hospital logo on her scrubs. He stared at her face like he was searching for an excuse. "We got a call," he said. "A call?" "Suspicious person in the staff lot." he replied. Someone reported you. The sentence landed like a weight. Suspicious, the most flexible word in the American dictionary. It can mean a broken window, or it can mean a black woman alone at night in a place someone else thinks she shouldn't be. Nia felt her stomach tighten. I'm not suspicious, she said, still calm. I'm exhausted. Harris stepped closer. ID, he said. Nia lifted a hand toward her badge. This is my hospital, ED, she said. I said ID, Harris snapped, as if her badge didn't count because it came from the wrong authority. Nia hesitated. Not long, just enough to do that mental math every black professional learns early. If I move too fast, he'll say I'm reaching. If I move too slow, he'll say I'm resisting. If I ask why, he'll say I'm arguing. So she narrated. I'm going into my bag, she said. My wallet is inside. Harris rolled his eyes. Don't get cute, he muttered. Nia's hand slipped into her tote and found her driver's license. She held it out. Harris took it, glanced at it, and immediately found the angle he wanted. This address isn't the hospital, he said. Nia stared. It's my home address, she replied. That's how IDs work. Harris's lips tightened. So you're saying you work here? He said slowly, but you can't prove it. Nia pointed, gently, controlled, at the badge still hanging from her chest. I can, she said. Right here. Harris didn't look. Take it off, he said. What? Take the badge off and hand it to me, he repeated. Nia felt heat creep up her neck. She reached for the clip. And that's when Harris said the first thing that told her this wasn't about procedure. People steal those, he said. Nia froze with her fingers on the lanyard. Stole. A nurse. In scrubs. Leaving a hospital. Accused of stealing a badge to... What? Stand in an employee lot and wait for police? The logic didn't matter. The feeling did. Harris wanted her small. He wanted her apologetic. He wanted her proving herself. And Nia realized something in that moment that hit like cold water. If she didn't have cameras, witnesses, and paperwork, he could turn this into anything. The hospital's security cameras were mounted high on poles at the edge of the lot. But security cameras don't always tell the story clearly. They give you angles, distance, silent footage. The body camera, though? The body camera gives you tone, gaze, words. And Harris didn't realize what he was handing Nia, simply by keeping that thing running. Because as he stepped closer, he leaned his head slightly and spoke low. Let me tell you something, he said. This lot has rules, and people like you don't get to decide them. People like you! Nia's face stayed still, but inside something hardened. What does that mean? She asked. Harris's eyes narrowed. It means stop acting like you run things, he said. You're going to do what I say. Nia felt the urge to look around, see if anyone was watching, but the lot was mostly empty. A few cars, a distant hum of traffic, and one person pushing a mop bucket near the loading dock, head down, pretending not to see. Nia did what she'd learned to do in emergencies. She anchored her voice. Officer Harris, she said, reading his nameplate like she wanted it on record. I am a registered nurse. I am leaving my shift. I want to go home. If you have a reason to detain me, tell me. If not, I'd like to get in my car. Harris laughed once, a short, humorless sound. You want to play lawyer? He said. We can play. You're trespassing until you prove you're allowed to be here. Trespassing in an employee parking lot at her place of work. Nia took a breath. Do you want to call the hospital? She asked. I can have my supervisor come down. Security can verify me. Harris's face tightened like she'd offended him by offering a solution. I don't need your help doing my job, he said. Then, with the kind of swagger that shows up right before someone makes a mistake on camera, he added, "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to put your hands on the hood. I'm going to search your bag. And if you don't cooperate, you're going to spend the night in a cell." Nia's heart jumped. "Search my bag?" she repeated. "Yes," Harris said. "Now." "And what are you searching for?" Harris stepped closer again. "Contraband," he said. Nia stared at him. Contraband, in a nurse's tote bag. What he really meant was control. And then he did something that made the air change. His hand moved, hovered near his holster. Not drawing, not yet. Just close enough to remind her that his threat wasn't theoretical. This is the part where the story could have gone the way so many stories go. Quiet compliance. A woman humiliated, searched, and sent home shaking. An officer driving away with the belief that he'd handled something. And a complaint that gets lost in a system designed to absorb harm without changing. But this time, Nia had something most people don't. She had the habits of a person trained to document. Because nursing teaches you something early. If it isn't charted, it didn't happen. Nia didn't reach for her phone, not abruptly. She didn't make a dramatic announcement. She simply shifted her tote slightly, opened the side pocket with 2 fingers, and tapped her phone's screen. Audio record, not for the internet, for proof. Harris noticed anyway. "What are you doing?" he snapped. Nia kept her eyes steady. "I'm documenting," she said, "just like I do at work." Harris's face darkened. "You're not recording me," he said. "I'm recording my interaction," she replied. He stepped in closer, invading her space, voice dropping. "You think you're smart," he said. "Let's see how smart you look when you're face down on the asphalt." The sentence sat there, cold, unnecessary, a threat dressed up as authority. Nia's throat tightened, and then a voice came from behind her. "Officer?" A man in a dark security jacket stood near the employee entrance, hospital security. He'd been doing rounds, he'd seen the cruiser, and he'd decided to stop pretending not to see. Harris turned. "This is police business," he said. The security guard didn't flinch. "She's staff," he said. "I see her all the time. That's Nurse Thompson." For the first time, Harris actually looked, at the badge on her chest. Nia watched the gears grind, because here was the problem. If he backed down now, he'd have to admit he was wrong. And some people would rather escalate than feel embarrassed. Harris's jaw tightened. "Then why'd we get a call?" he barked. The security guard shrugged. "People call about anything," he said. "But she works here. You can verify with HR. I can call her floor supervisor right now." Harris stared at him, then at Nia. And instead of apologizing, of course he didn't, he chose a different exit. He pivoted the blame. "Well, she was being uncooperative," he said. Nia's eyes widened. "Uncooperative?" she repeated. "I answered every question." Harris pointed at her. "Don't point your finger at me," he snapped. "I didn't—" "Hands on the hood!" Harris barked again. The security guard stepped forward. "She's staff," he said. "I see her all the time. That's Nurse Thompson." For the first time, Harris actually looked, at the badge on her chest. Nia watched the gears grind, because here was the problem. If he backed down now, he'd have to admit he was wrong. And some people would rather escalate than feel embarrassed. Harris's jaw tightened. "Then why'd we get a call?" he barked. The security guard shrugged. "People call about anything," he said. "But she works here. You can verify with HR. I can call her floor supervisor right now." Harris stared at him, then at Nia. And instead of apologizing, of course he didn't, he chose a different exit. He pivoted the blame. "Well, she was being uncooperative," he said. Nia's eyes widened. Uncooperative? She repeated. I answered every question. Harris pointed at her. Don't point your finger at me, he snapped. I didn't. Hands on the hood! Harris barked again. The security guard stepped forward. Officer, he said carefully, she's not a suspect. This is a staff lot. She's leaving work. Harris's eyes flashed. You want to interfere? He said. The security guard held up his hands. I'm trying to de-escalate, he replied. De-escalate. A word that suddenly felt like it belonged to a different universe than Harris's ego. Nia's phone kept recording, and Harris, still lit up by the body cam, said the line that would later become the spine of the case. You people always want special treatment, he said. Not tonight. If you've ever had a moment where your professional identity evaporates in front of someone's prejudice, you understand what Nia felt. She wasn't Nurse Thompson to him. She wasn't ma'am. She wasn't a tired human being trying to go home. She was a category, and categories are easy to threaten. Nia swallowed and did what she did with panicked patience. She slowed everything down. Officer Harris, she said, I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking to be treated normally. Please stop threatening me. Please let me leave. Harris leaned in. Or what? He said. The security guard's radio crackled. A second security officer was arriving, and somewhere inside the hospital, a nurse manager on night shift was being called down, because the security guard wasn't just going to watch this happen. Harris heard the radio. You could see it on the body cam later, the exact moment he realized more witnesses were coming. His posture shifted. Not kinder, just more careful. He stepped back a half step. Fine, he said, as if he was granting mercy instead of correcting his own behavior. Let's verify. The nurse manager arrived in a navy cardigan, hair pulled back, eyes sharp with that hospital leadership fatigue. What's going on? She asked. Harris gestured at Nia like she was a nuisance. She was suspicious, he said. The nurse manager stared at him. She's my charge nurse, she said. She's been on shift since 7 p.m. You can check her badge. You can check her time card. She works here. Harris's cheeks reddened. All right, he muttered. Just checking. Still no apology, still no acknowledgement of the threat. He thrust Nia's license back toward her. Next time, he said, don't make it hard. Nia took the license with a steady hand, and in the audio, you can hear her exhale. Not relief, control. Because she knew something now. He hadn't just harassed her, he'd done it on camera. Nia drove home with both hands on the wheel, and her heart still pounding like she'd sprinted. When she pulled into her apartment complex, she sat in her car for a full minute without moving. Her phone was still in her cup holder. Recording stopped, file saved. She stared at it like it was a tiny piece of justice. Small, fragile, but real. Inside, she washed her hands 3 times. Not because they were dirty, but because she couldn't shake the feeling of being handled. The next morning, her supervisor called. Nia, she said softly. Security told me what happened. Are you okay? Nia laughed once. Not funny, just disbelief. No, she said. I'm not, and I'm not letting it go. That's the moment the story changed. Because the harassment wasn't the end. It was evidence. Hospitals are bureaucracies. Police departments are bureaucracies. And bureaucracies have a reflex. Protect the institution. Minimize the incident. Reduce a human experience into a line on a form. When Nia filed a complaint with the department, she got the familiar language. We take all allegations seriously. We will review the matter. We are committed to professionalism. But professionalism isn't a slogan. It's a tone, and the tone was on the body cam. So Nia did what a lot of people don't have the energy to do after being shaken. She got organized. She requested the incident number. She asked for the body cam footage. She asked the hospital for security camera angles. She asked the security guard to write a statement. And she reached out to a civil rights attorney whose name had been passed around quietly among healthcare workers like a survival tip. His name was Daniel Reyes. He didn't promise miracles, he promised process. He listened to Nia's recording. Once, then again, and when it ended, he went quiet. "Did he ever say you were free to leave?" he asked. "No," Nia replied. "Did he threaten arrest?" "Yes." "Did he threaten force?" Nia's throat tightened. "Yes." Daniel nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "This isn't just rude. This is coercion. This is unreasonable detention. And the language he used, on his own body cam, turns this into something a jury will understand instantly." Nia stared at him. "You think we can win?" Daniel leaned forward. "I think they're going to want to settle," he said. "Here's the part people misunderstand about settlements. A city doesn't pay big money because it feels guilty. It pays because it feels vulnerable. Discovery is where that vulnerability gets exposed. Emails, training records, prior complaints, dispatch logs, body cam footage. And the most dangerous thing for a department isn't just one bad night on video. It's a pattern. Because if Officer Harris had done this before, if there were prior complaints about how he treated people who didn't belong in his mental picture of a place, then one night in a hospital parking lot becomes a much bigger story. When Daniel filed the lawsuit, the city responded the way cities do. They denied everything. They claimed Harris was responding to a suspicious person call. They said he acted in the interest of public safety. They argued he needed to verify identity, but then they had to hand over the footage. And footage doesn't care about legal strategy. It just plays. In the video, Harris didn't sound careful. He sounded irritated. He sounded possessive. He sounded like he believed a hospital lot belonged to his authority more than it belonged to the staff who kept the place running. "You people like you. Face down on the asphalt." A jury doesn't need a law degree to understand what those phrases mean, and a city attorney doesn't need a jury trial to know what those phrases can cost. Mediation was scheduled in a bland office building with beige walls and stale coffee. Nia sat beside Daniel at a long table, hands clasped so tight her knuckles looked pale. On the other side of the hall, the city's lawyers sat with risk managers. Officer Harris wasn't there. He rarely is. In these cases, the institution wants distance from the face of the problem. The mediator, a former judge with tired eyes, walked between rooms like a man trying to calm two storms. First offer, a low number, a non-apology, a promise of training. Daniel didn't blink. "No," he said. "Second offer, higher. Still not serious." Daniel shook his head again. Nia sat quietly, listening to numbers float through the air like they were measurements of what her dignity was worth. She wasn't thinking about payday. She was thinking about the moment Harris's hand hovered near his holster. She was thinking about that sentence, face down on the asphalt, and how quickly a threat can become a headline. She was thinking about how many other nurses, techs, janitors, and security guards walked through that lot alone at night. If this happened to her, how many times had it happened to someone with less leverage and no recording? The mediator returned again. This time his voice changed. Less negotiation, more warning. "They don't want this in front of a jury," he said. Daniel nodded. "Then they know what to do," he replied. An hour later, the number arrived. $1.5 million, with conditions, no admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality language, policy revisions, a commitment to retraining, a review of complaints, money and paper trying to contain a moment that should have never existed. Nia heard the number and felt nothing like triumph. She felt tired, and, surprisingly, she felt grief. because the fact that a hospital nurse needed a 7-figure settlement to be treated like a human being was its own kind of indictment. Daniel leaned in. "You don't have to take it," he whispered. "We can go to trial." Nia looked down at her hands. Then she looked up. "What happens if we go to trial?" she asked. Daniel was honest. "It takes years," he said. "It gets public. They'll dissect your life. They'll try to make you look difficult, and it will keep you living in that parking lot over and over." Nia closed her eyes for a moment. Then she said the sentence that sounded like defeat, but wasn't. "I want it to stop," she said. So she signed. When the settlement happened, the city didn't hold a press conference saying, "We were wrong." They rarely do. They issued a short statement about resolving a dispute. They emphasized that the officer acted within the scope of his duties, even as they wrote a check that said the opposite in the only language they couldn't spin. Inside the hospital, the news traveled faster, not as gossip, as caution, as validation. Nurses whispered in break rooms. Security officers nodded quietly. A few older staff members said, "I'm glad she didn't let that slide." And Nia, still doing her job, still walking those halls, noticed something shift. The lot had more lighting installed. Security increased patrols. The hospital updated policies about police interactions on campus. Not because the hospital suddenly discovered empathy, because they discovered liability, and liability makes institutions move. As for Officer Harris, the official statements were vague. Administrative review, internal investigation, reassignment. Some consequences that departments prefer to keep quiet. But the real consequence, the one that mattered, was that his behavior had a cost. Not absorbed, not ignored, not shrugged off, paid. Weeks later, Nia parked in the same staff lot. Same corner, same row. The flickering light still flickered, but the air felt different. Not safe, not magically fixed, just different. Because when she stepped out of her car this time, she didn't look over her shoulder immediately. She stood for a second, breathing in the night, and she realized something. The encounter hadn't just scared her, it had trained her to anticipate, to brace, to carry the weight of someone else's bias like it was her responsibility. The settlement didn't erase that, but it did something else. It took the cost of that bias and shoved it back where it belonged. On the institution, on the city, on the systems that keep telling people like Nia to be grateful for crumbs of normal treatment. Because what Harris demanded that night wasn't proof of identity, it was proof of belonging. And belonging is not something a nurse should have to argue for while wearing scrubs. So let me leave you with this. If you were Nia, tired, alone, leaving a hospital after midnight, what would you have done? Would you have complied in silence just to get home safe? Would you have fought in the moment and risked escalation? Or would you have done what she did? Document, endure, and then force the system to answer with consequences? Drop your answer in the comments, because how you respond to that question says a lot about what you've lived, and what you've had the luxury of never having to live. Because this story isn't rare. It just isn't always filmed. A vague call, a suspicious person, a parking lot, a badge, a threat, and a person who is forced to prove they have a right to exist in a space they already earned. Nia didn't break a law. She didn't steal a car. She didn't trespass. She didn't do anything except walk to her own vehicle after keeping strangers alive. And still, she was treated like a problem. Until the body cam showed the truth, until the paperwork showed the pattern, until a city wrote $1.5 million on a line and tried to call it resolution. But here's what that number really meant. It meant the evidence was loud. It meant the threats were real. It meant someone finally had to pay for the damage that usually gets handed to the person targeted. And it meant one more officer learned, too late, that a body camera doesn't protect you from accountability. It protects the truth.
You protest here.
Move!
Now.
This is a public sidewalk. What law am I breaking?
I'm not debating. Think behind your back.
Release the files!
You people always think the rules don't apply to you.
The handcuffs clicked shut so fast that for a split second, the crowd didn't understand what they were hearing. Not the shouting, not the chants, not the traffic rolling past the plaza, like nothing unusual was happening. The sound they registered was metal on metal, sharp, final, followed by a single sentence from a police officer who sounded almost bored as he said it. "You can't protest here." Andre Carter's wrists were already behind his back. His phone had slipped from his hand and hit the concrete screen first, and the phrase he'd been shouting, "Release the Epstein files," was still hanging in the air like smoke, echoing off the courthouse steps and the glass front of City Hall. He didn't fight, he didn't swing, he didn't threaten anyone. He just stared at the officer and said, slowly, like he couldn't believe he had to say it out loud, "This is a sidewalk." The officer didn't answer the point. He answered the person. He leaned in close enough that Andre could smell the coffee on his breath and hear the tight satisfaction in his voice. "You people always think the rules don't apply to you." That was the moment the footage became inevitable, because there were cameras everywhere. A student live streaming from the fountain, a tourist filming the courthouse architecture, a local mom recording because she'd learned, the hard way, that you record when a badge gets too confident, and the officer's own body camera, still blinking red on his chest, captured the whole thing, a black protester on a public sidewalk, handcuffed for a chant, while the officer insisted it was for safety. This is the story of how one arrest turned a noisy afternoon into a federal lawsuit, how a single phrase, "You can't protest here," became the centerpiece of a First Amendment case, and how a department that thought it could bury the incident learned a hard truth. In 2026, you don't just arrest someone on a sidewalk, you arrest them on the internet. Before we rewind and lay out exactly how this happened, quick question. Where are you watching from? City, state, country? Drop it in the comments. And if you care about stories where power gets tested in public, where one decision becomes a legal earthquake, hit like and subscribe. It helps more people find cases like this before they get quietly brushed off as a misunderstanding. Now let's go back to the beginning, because this didn't start with handcuffs. It started with a plan. Andre Carter wasn't a career activist in the way people imagine it. Megaphone, bullhorn, camera always pointed at his own face. He was a warehouse supervisor who got tired of watching the world make rules in secret, then punish people for asking questions out loud. 32 years old, broad shoulders from lifting boxes since his teens, a voice that carried, not because he was trying to dominate a room, but because he was used to being ignored and had learned how to refuse it. He'd grown up in South Bay Terrace, the kind of neighborhood where you learn early that official explanations are often just the clean version of what someone wants you to accept. His mother worked nights as a CNA, his father was in and out. Andre learned responsibility the way some people learn hobbies, by necessity. When national headlines exploded with renewed demands for transparency, documents, investigations, sealed records, names, Andre didn't pretend he was an expert on every detail. That wasn't the point. The point was the pattern, secrecy, delay, institutions protecting themselves. And then, the moment anyone got loud about it, suddenly the loud person became the problem. He watched a press conference where an official offered carefully polished sentences that said almost nothing. He watched the comment sections fill with rage and disbelief. He watched people argue about facts, theories, agendas. And he thought, fine, if everyone's going to argue anyway, let's argue in the open where power can't mute it. So he organized something small. A lunchtime protest outside City Hall and the county courthouse. right on the public plaza where protests had happened for decades. Not inside the building, not blocking doors, not interfering with court proceedings, just signs, voices, and a demand for transparency. Andre even did the boring part that nobody wants to do. He looked up the city's permit rules, he read the municipal code about amplified sound, he printed out the public forum policies that described the plaza as open to expressive activity, with time, place, and manner restrictions. No bullhorns, no blocking entrances. Keep a clear path, don't trespass. Simple. He followed all of it. And the day of the protest, the sky was bright and cruelly normal. Blue overhead, wind pushing flags on the courthouse poles, lunch crowds cutting through the plaza with coffee and sandwiches like nothing monumental was about to happen. By noon, there were about 40 people. Not hundreds, not thousands. 40. A mix of ages, a mix of politics, a mix of reasons. Some were there because they wanted government transparencies in general. Some were there because they believed specific documents were being withheld. Some were there because they were sick of watching the rich and connected escape consequences. And some were just there because they wanted to stand in a public space and remind the world that the First Amendment isn't a decoration. Andre stood near the fountain with a handmade sign. Release the files. No more secrets. He wasn't screaming, he wasn't threatening, he was chanting. And at first, it looked like one of those ordinary American scenes that barely makes the local news. A handful of citizens in a plaza, police nearby, everyone doing the dance that democracy requires. Until a patrol car rolled up to the curb with the slow, deliberate posture of a predator deciding whether the herd was worth the sprint. Officer Mark Daly had been on the job 8 years. Not a rookie, not brand new. Old enough to have learned the system, young enough to still believe his badge should end arguments. White, mid-30s, the kind of face that can look friendly in a family photo and cold in a body cam frame depending on the day and the target. He stepped out of his cruiser and didn't scan the whole crowd the way a neutral officer would. He scanned for a problem, and when his eyes landed on Andre, they stayed there. Not because Andre was the loudest. There was a white man with a giant poster board shouting at anyone who would look. There was a woman yelling into a phone, ranting like she was auditioning for a cable segment. There were 2 guys arguing loudly about what the files even meant. Andre was steady, voice strong, controlled, rhythmic, but Daly walked straight toward him anyway. In the video that would later spread, you see Daly moving past other protesters without stopping, past the loudest voices, past the most chaotic energy, right to Andre. "Hey," Daly said, close, clipped. "You need to move." Andre blinked. "Move where?" "Not here," Daly said, gesturing vaguely like the plaza belonged to him. "You can't protest here." Andre didn't raise his voice. He did something almost more dangerous in the eyes of certain people in authority. He asked a question. "Officer, this is a public sidewalk," he said. "What law are we breaking?" Daly's jaw tightened. "You're causing a disturbance." Andre looked around, people walking past, some filming, some ignoring. "A disturbance how? We're not blocking anyone." Daly leaned in, eyes hard. "I'm not debating with you. Step back and move along." Andre's heart rate climbed, not from fear of being wrong, but from recognizing the pattern. This wasn't about a rule, it was about control. He pointed to his sign and said, "We're here peacefully. No bullhorn, no blocking. If there's a specific ordinance, tell me. I'll comply with the ordinance." That's the kind of sentence that sounds reasonable to normal people. To Daly, it sounded like a challenge. He turned his head slightly toward his shoulder mic. "Dispatch, I've got an unruly subject refusing to comply." Unruly. Andre hadn't moved, hadn't touched him, hadn't threatened anything. Daly was writing the story in real time, right into the radio. Andre took a slow breath. "Officer, I'm not refusing. I'm asking what the lawful order is based on." Daly's hand hovered near his belt, the way it does when someone wants you to feel the gravity of their authority. "Last warning," he said. "You can't protest here." Andre's voice rose, not screaming, just louder so the crowd could hear. "I'm on a sidewalk. I'm not blocking anything. I'm exercising my rights. Release the Epstein files." That's when Daly reached out, not for Andre's sign, not to guide him away, to grab him. What happens next is where everything turns from tense encounter to federal case. Daly seized Andre's wrist and spun him. Andre stumbled, caught himself, and instinctively said, "Don't touch me." That was enough. Daly barked, "Stop resisting," even as Andre's hands were open and his body was trying to find balance, not fight. The crowd surged forward, not onto Daly, but closer, voices rising. "Why are you grabbing him?" "He's not resisting." "What law did he break?" A woman's voice cut through the chaos. "I'm recording, officer." And that's when Daly performed the oldest trick in the modern policing playbook. He reframed the situation to justify the escalation. "You're interfering with my investigation," he snapped at the crowd. Then to Andre, "Hands behind your back." Andre's face tightened. "For what?" "For disorderly conduct," Daly said. But he didn't say what conduct. He didn't point to any specific behavior beyond being loud. And then came the handcuffs. Click, click. Andre's phone hit the ground. Daly pushed him toward the curb like he wanted to display him. Like the whole point was to show everyone else what happens when you don't accept the first command without questioning it. "Tell me your name," Daly demanded. Andre gave it. Daly asked for ID. Andre said it was in his pocket. Daly patted him down, rough enough to make Andre's shoulders tense. Someone yelled, "That's excessive!" Daly snapped his head toward the voice. "Back up!" Then, almost casually, he delivered the line that would define the lawsuit. "You can't protest here," he repeated, like it was a fact of nature. "Take it somewhere else." Andre, wrists burning, stared at him. "Where?" he asked. "Where can I protest?" Daly shrugged like the question was ridiculous. "Not my job to educate you." And that, right there, is the heart of the constitutional issue. Because in America, the government doesn't get to decide your free speech is allowed only in places that make it easy to ignore. They walked Andre to the patrol car, not because he posed a danger, because they wanted to remove the symbol. As Daly guided him, you can hear Andre's voice, controlled, furious, wounded. "I'm being arrested for a chant," he said, on a sidewalk. Daly shoved him into the back seat and slammed the door. And for a few seconds, the crowd didn't know what to do. Some followed the cruiser on foot until it pulled away. Some stayed and kept chanting, louder now. A man in a hoodie looked into a live stream camera and said, "If they can do that to him, they can do it to any of us." That's when the incident stopped being local, because the live stream didn't end, it spread. At the station, the booking process turned humiliation into paperwork. Andre's shoelaces taken, his pockets emptied, his fingerprints scanned, his mugshot captured under harsh fluorescent lights that make everyone look guilty, no matter what they did. The charge sheet read like a vague insult dressed as law. Disorderly conduct, failure to obey a lawful order. Interfering with an officer, Andre kept asking the same question. What was the lawful order based on? The booking officer didn't answer. He just said, "You can ask the judge." Andre sat in a holding cell and tried to slow his breathing. Not because he thought he was going to prison, but because he understood what the arrest was trying to teach him. If you speak too loudly about certain things, we can make your day disappear. Hours later, he was released on a citation with a court date. Not a dramatic bail hearing, not a long detention, just enough time to bruise his wrists, steal his afternoon, and stamp him with criminal in the system. When he stepped out into the evening air, the plaza was quiet again. The protest signs were gone. The fountain still ran like it hadn't watched anything. Andre looked down at his wrist, red marks, swelling starting, and he realized something with cold clarity. This wasn't going to end with him going home and forgetting it, because he couldn't forget it. And more importantly, the internet wouldn't let the department forget it. By midnight, clips were everywhere, not polished news segments, raw angles. You see Andre standing still. You see Daly approach him. You hear Andre ask for the law. You hear Daly say, "You can't protest here." You hear, "You people," and if you've ever watched the comment section of something like this unfold, you already know the pattern. Half the people were furious. How is this legal? This is exactly why people don't trust police. First Amendment doesn't mean anything if a cop can just say no. And the other half insisted it was Andre's fault for not complying instantly. Just move. Why argue? He should have known better. As if constitutional rights are like a speed limit, something you only get to use if the person enforcing it feels like honoring it. Andre watched the videos late at night in his apartment, not because he enjoyed it, because he needed to see what the camera saw. He needed to confirm he wasn't imagining the escalation. And the more he watched, the more it became undeniable. Daly didn't arrest him because he was dangerous. Daly arrested him because Andre refused to shrink. 2 days later, Andre got a call from his mother. Not to ask if he was okay, to tell him she'd seen the video. Her voice was tight with the old fear that never leaves black parents, no matter how grown their child is. "You need to be careful," she said. Andre stared at the wall. "I was careful." "I know," she said, softer. "That's what scares me." That sentence, that quiet resignation, hit Andre harder than the cuffs, because that's what this is really about. Not just one arrest, but the constant calculation. How careful do you have to be to survive your own rights? Andre had a choice then, and it wasn't just legal, it was personal. He could show up to court, plead something down, pay a fine, and let the system treat it like a minor misunderstanding. Or he could push back and risk everything that comes with that. Attention, stress, retaliation, the long grind of litigation. If you were Andre, handcuffed, humiliated, told you can't protest here, what would you do? Would you take the easy exit, or would you make them explain their power under oath? Andre chose the harder road. He called a civil rights lawyer. Her name was Dana Ruiz. She wasn't flashy, she wasn't trying to be famous. She was the kind of attorney who spoke in calm sentences that sounded simple until you realized every word was a knife. Andre sat in her office and slid his documents across the table. The citation, the court date, the screenshots of the videos. Dana didn't start with outrage. She started with questions. Where were you standing exactly? Was the sidewalk blocked? Was there a permit issue? Did you use amplified sound? Andre answered each one. No. 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 Dana nodded, then played the body cam clip that had been obtained through a quick public records request, because the department, at first, thought releasing it would help them. On camera, Daly's voice was clear. You can't protest here. Dana paused the video on that moment, then looked at Andre. In constitutional law, she said, public sidewalks are what we call a traditional public forum. That's basically the highest protection zone for speech. Andre frowned. So he can't just... No, Dana said. He can't just decide speech isn't allowed. The government can enforce reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, but they have to be content neutral and narrowly tailored. And they have to leave open, ample alternative channels for communication. Andre stared at her. He didn't give me any alternative. Dana nodded. And he singled you out. Andre's throat tightened. That's the racist part. Dana didn't flinch from the word. If we can show selective enforcement, different treatment based on race or content, this becomes bigger. She pulled out a legal pad and wrote a few words. 42 U.S.C. ARFs, 1983, First Amendment retaliation. Unlawful arrest. Fourth Amendment equal protection. Andre didn't know all the terms. He didn't have to. He understood the feeling. Dana explained it in plain language. If a police officer arrests you because you're speaking, she said, that can be retaliation. And if the arrest lacks probable cause, it becomes even clearer. You don't lose your rights because an officer gets annoyed. Andre looked down at his wrists. Does it matter what I was shouting? He asked. Dana paused. It matters to the story because people react emotionally to the phrase, but legally, the First Amendment protects speech people hate. If speech had to be popular to be protected, it wouldn't be a right. Andre exhaled slowly. Okay, he said. So what now? Dana leaned forward. Now we make them explain, she said. On paper, in court, under oath. The first move was a letter, not a dramatic press conference, a demand letter. It laid out the facts. Andre was on a public sidewalk. He was not blocking access. He was not using amplification. He asked for the legal basis. He was arrested anyway. It requested dismissal of the charges. It requested preservation of evidence, body cam footage, radio logs, dispatch notes, training materials, complaints, and it warned that if the city didn't resolve it quickly, a federal lawsuit would follow. The city's response was predictable. They claimed the officer acted for public safety. They insisted Andre was disruptive. They used the kind of vague language that sounds reasonable until you ask what it actually means. But they made one mistake. They didn't just defend the arrest. They defended the idea that the officer could decide, on the fly, where protest is allowed. In other words, they defended censorship with a badge. Dana read the response and didn't look surprised. This is good, she said. Andre blinked. How is that good? Because they're committing to a position, Dana replied. They're saying it in writing. Now we get to challenge it. And then she said the sentence that changed Andre's life for the next year. We're filing. The complaint hit federal court with a name that looked plain on paper but carried weight. Andre Carter Thesis, City of Westbridge, Officer Mark Daly, et al. It alleged that Andre's arrest violated his First Amendment right to free speech and assembly. It alleged unlawful seizure under the Fourth Amendment. It alleged selective enforcement. And it described the officer's words, "you people," as evidence of bias, not just attitude. The city responded the way cities often do. They didn't apologize. They didn't admit error. They tried to bury the case under procedure. They filed motions to dismiss. They argued qualified immunity, an often misunderstood doctrine that can protect officers from liability unless the right was clearly established. In plain language, if courts haven't already said, you can't do this exact thing in this exact scenario, officers sometimes escape consequences. Dana's response was blunt. The First Amendment on a public sidewalk is clearly established, she argued. Arresting a person for protesting is clearly established. Retaliating against speech is clearly established. And then she did what good civil rights lawyers do. She made it simple. She showed the judge the video. In court filings, you don't get dramatic music. You don't get slow-motion replays. You get exhibits. And Exhibit A was the moment Daly said, "You can't protest here." Exhibit B was Andre asking what law he broke. Exhibit C was the handcuffs. The judge didn't need to be an activist to see the problem. A public sidewalk is where democracy lives when it wants to be visible. If police can remove people from it because they don't like the noise, or the person making it, then free speech becomes something you rent from authority. The judge denied parts of the motion to dismiss, allowing key claims to proceed. That's when discovery started. And discovery is where institutions learn that it was just one incident is hard to maintain when lawyers start digging. Dana demanded Daly's body cam in full, unedited form, all radio communications from that day, any internal emails about the protest, training materials about protests and public forums, complaint history on Daly arrest, records from the plaza area to compare enforcement. The city tried to resist. They claimed burden, they claimed privacy, they claimed security. Dana pushed back, because the truth is, you don't find patterns by asking politely. You find patterns by forcing the system to open its drawers. And slowly, pieces came out. The full body cam showed something the short clip didn't. Daly had walked past a loud white protester first. He'd glanced at him, then kept walking, straight to Andre. When Dana laid those moments side by side, it didn't prove racism by itself, but it built a question the city couldn't answer cleanly. Why Andre? Why him first? Why him aggressively? Why him in cuffs? Then came the dispatch logs. The original call, if there was one, wasn't riot or violence. It was a vague disturbance report, not an emergency, no weapons, no threats. Then came internal messages, officers texting about the protest. Most were boring, but one thread included a line that made Dana sit up straight. He's got the crowd worked up. Shut it down. Shut it down. Not keep it safe, not manage traffic, shut it down. That phrase is a mindset, and mindsets are what lawsuits expose. Andre's criminal citation was still pending during all of this. The city didn't want to dismiss it too quickly because dismissing it looked like admitting the arrest was wrong. But the longer it stayed, the worse the optics got. Finally, after a quiet hearing, the prosecutor dropped the charges. No statement, no apology. Just a dismissal that looked to anyone paying attention like retreat. Andre should have felt relief. Instead, he felt something else, anger, because they could drop charges like it was nothing after putting his body in cuffs like it was nothing. That contrast, how heavy the system feels when it lands on you, and how light it feels when it's tossed aside by the people who control it, became the emotional fuel of the case. And then came the depositions. A deposition is where the story gets stripped of slogans. There's no crowd, no chants, no adrenaline. Just a conference room, a court reporter, a lawyer, and a person who has to answer questions truthfully. Andre sat with Dana beside him, while the city's attorney tried to frame him as an agitator. "Were you trying to provoke the police?" the attorney asked. Andre blinked. "No." "Were you shouting inflammatory phrases?" "I was chanting," Andre said, "at a protest." "Do you understand how that might alarm the public?" Andre held the attorney's gaze. "Do you understand how handcuffing a man for chanting might alarm the public?" he asked. Dana's hand touched his arm lightly, steadying, not silencing. Then it was Daly's turn. Officer Daly sat under fluorescent lights in his uniform, jaw working like he was chewing anger. Dana's voice stayed calm. "Officer," she said, "what law specifically prohibited protest on that sidewalk?" Daly hesitated. "It was a restricted area." Dana tilted her head. "Restricted by what? An ordinance? A posted sign? A court order?" Daly's eyes flicked toward the city attorney. "We have security protocols." Dana nodded, as if she'd expected that. "Show me the protocol." The city attorney objected. Dana smiled slightly. "We requested the protocol in discovery. It was not produced." Daly swallowed. Dana continued. "When Mr. Carter asked you where he could protest, what did you tell him?" Daly's voice was flat. "I told him not there." Dana didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "So you didn't provide an alternative location," she said. "You simply told him his protest was not allowed." Daly tried to pivot. He was causing a disturbance. Dana leaned in. Describe the disturbance. Daly said. He was yelling. Dana asked, was he threatening anyone? No. Blocking anyone? No. Using amplification? No. Inciting violence? No. Dana paused, letting the silence do what silence does best. Then she asked, Officer, did you arrest him because he was loud, or because you didn't like what he was saying? Daly's face tightened. And that's the question the lawsuit was built to answer. As the case moved forward, the city's tone changed. At first, they'd acted like the lawsuit was annoying. Then they acted like it was dangerous, because juries don't like watching someone get cuffed for speech. And even more than juries, cities don't like the possibility of a precedent, of a ruling that says, clearly, you cannot do this, with the city's name attached. Settlement talks began quietly. No admission of wrongdoing, of course. Cities love that phrase, but money has its own honesty. Dana told Andre, if they're offering, it means they're scared of trial. Andre asked, is that justice? Dana didn't romanticize it. It's accountability in the language institutions understand. Andre sat with that, because he wasn't chasing a headline. He was chasing something deeper. A line in the sand that said, you don't get to handcuff my voice. And that brings us to the bigger picture, the part that turns one arrest into a cultural argument. Because whether you care about Andre's chant or not, the question underneath it is the same question every generation has to answer. Do we believe in free speech when it's inconvenient? Do we believe in protest when it's loud? Do we believe in rights when the person exercising them doesn't look like someone the system is used to treating gently? Andre's case wasn't just about one officer. It was about the way public safety can become a magic phrase that excuses anything. It's about how easily a sidewalk can become restricted when the wrong person is standing on it. It's about how quickly disorderly conduct gets used as a net to catch speech the system finds annoying. And it's about race, because it always is, even when people pretend it isn't. Because Andre noticed something that doesn't show up cleanly in court filings. When Daly cuffed him, the crowd's energy shifted. Some people stepped back, fearful. Some stepped forward, angry. But the white protesters looked shocked in a way Andre didn't. They looked shocked like they hadn't expected the system to do that to them. Andre looked shocked like he'd seen the system do worse, and still couldn't believe it was happening in broad daylight, on a sidewalk, for a chant. That difference matters. It's the difference between being surprised by power and being haunted by it. In the end, whether this case settles quietly or goes to trial loudly, it already did something. It exposed the lie inside the officer's simplest sentence. You can't protest here. Because on a public sidewalk, in a free society, the default is that you can. The government has to justify restrictions, not the citizen. And the moment that burden flips, when the citizen has to beg permission to speak, that's not democracy, that's management. Andre didn't ask for permission, he asked for the law. And for that, he was handcuffed. So here's the question I'll leave you with, because it's the question juries, judges, and cities all end up facing eventually. If a police officer can turn a public sidewalk into a no-speech zone with a single command, what is the First Amendment worth in real life? And if you've made it this far, tell me what you think. Should arrests like this be treated as split-second decisions, or as deliberate choices with consequences? Because Andre Carter's wrists healed, the bruises faded, but the footage didn't. The footage stayed. And now it's not just a viral clip. It's a lawsuit, a record, a challenge, a reminder that the loudest words aren't always the chants in the plaza. Sometimes the loudest words are the ones spoken by a government employee who forgets, for a moment, who works for whom. You can't protest here. In federal court, Andre is answering that sentence the only way the system seems to fully understand. Prove it.
Sir, after 58 years, your release is granted. You're free to go.
Free at my age? I ain't been free since Kennedy was alive.
Your son wanted to be here today, but he passed last winter.
My boy's gone. He was 5 when they took me.
The steel door didn't swing open the way it does in movies. It cracked, just enough for a rectangle of hallway light to spill across the floor, pale and indifferent, like the prison itself didn't want to admit anything had changed. A guard stood there with a clipboard, eyes trained on procedure, not emotion. "Mr. Booker," he said. Elias Booker pushed himself up from the thin mattress that had shaped his spine for more years than most people keep a marriage. His hands, large, weathered, scarred in places from work details and time, settled at his sides like they weren't sure where they belonged anymore. The guard cleared his throat. "Sir, after 58 years, your release is granted. You're free to go." The words floated there, unreal. Elias blinked once. "Free at my age?" he rasped. "I ain't been free since Kennedy was alive." The guard's face flickered, something like discomfort, something like respect, something like guilt that had nowhere to land. He glanced down at the clipboard again. "Your son wanted to be here today," he said, "but he passed last winter." For a moment, Elias didn't understand the sentence. Passed, like a car on the highway, like a test, like time. "My boy's gone?" Elias whispered. His throat tightened as if the prison had reached inside and grabbed him by the voice. "He was 5 when they took me." That was the moment the release stopped being a victory. That was the moment it turned into something sharper. Because the state could open a gate, it could sign a piece of paper, it could even write a check. But it couldn't give Elias Booker back the 58 years it had swallowed, one sunrise at a time, while his child grew up without him. And it couldn't undo what it took from a little boy who spent his whole life waiting for a father who never came home. This is the story of how one wrong accusation in the early 1960s turned into a lifetime sentence, how a case built on shaky testimony and quiet misconduct held up for nearly 6 decades, and how, when the truth finally clawed its way into daylight, the state paid $9.2 million to make the problem disappear. But money doesn't erase time, and time is what this story is really about. Before Elias Booker was a number stitched onto denim, he was a kid with city dirt on his shoes and ambition hidden behind the kind of caution you learn early when you're black and poor in America. He grew up on the edge of a neighborhood that was constantly being cleaned up by people who didn't live in it. On his block, the world sounded like radios in open windows, kids running on cracked sidewalks, and the distant hum of a highway that promised escape but never quite delivered it. His mother worked 2 jobs and still came home exhausted enough to fall asleep, sitting upright at the kitchen table. His father, when he was around, was a man made of hands, big hands, hard hands, hands that could fix an engine but couldn't always fix a family. Elias learned early that the city didn't hand out softness, so he built his own. He learned to laugh anyway. He learned to keep his head down when police cruisers slowed. He learned the simple math of survival. Don't give them a reason. And yet, the cruel joke of his life would be this: he didn't need to give them a reason. They would find one. By the time he was 19, Elias had a young wife named Lorraine and a son named Marcus, who treated his father's shoulders like they were a jungle gym. Marcus was 5, bright-eyed, loud in the way only little boys can be, always asking questions that made adults smile and sigh at the same time. "Why the sky so big? Why you gotta go to work? Why my shoes don't fit no more?" Elias answered the best he could, and on the evening that changed everything, he left the house thinking he'd be back before Marcus fell asleep. He never made it home. The crime that would swallow Elias Booker happened fast, too fast for the story that later formed around it. a small corner grocery store, a cash register, a struggle, a man dead on the tile floor. In the official record, the victim became a name on paper. The event became a case number. The neighborhood became a high crime area. But on the street, it was grief. It was fear. It was a siren slicing through night. And it was pressure, instant pressure, for the police to deliver an answer. In places like Elias's neighborhood, that pressure doesn't always land on truth. It lands on whoever is easiest to grab. A witness claimed she saw a young black man running. A sketch was drawn that looked like 1,000 other sketches. A rumor spread, and by the next afternoon, detectives had Elias in an interview room. No lawyer, no parent, no understanding of how quickly a conversation can become a confession when you're alone with men who already decided you did it. They asked questions at first, then they asked them louder, then they stopped asking and started telling. "We know you were there. We know it was you. Help yourself, son." Elias kept saying the same thing. "I didn't do it." But "I didn't do it" isn't a magic spell. It doesn't make an officer stop. It doesn't make a prosecutor hesitate. It doesn't put you back on your porch with your son tugging your sleeve. Instead, it becomes the first line in a story they will later call resistance. And resistance, in the hands of the system, is often treated like guilt. Elias was charged, then arraigned, then paraded in front of cameras like a solved problem. Lorraine saw his face on the evening news and dropped a plate. Marcus, 5 years old, watched his mother cry and didn't know why. All he knew was that his father stopped coming home. Here's what most people don't understand about wrongful convictions. They rarely look wrong at the beginning. They look tidy. They look official. They look like the system doing its job. That's what makes them so dangerous. In Elias's case, the trial was scheduled quickly. Too quickly for a public defender overloaded with files. Too quickly for anyone to dig into alternative suspects. Too quickly for a young black man with no money to understand what was happening to his life. The prosecution's case was simple. A witness identified him. A detective testified that Elias made statements that indicated knowledge of the crime. A prosecutor looked at the jury and said the words that have put innocent men in cages for a century. "Ladies and gentlemen, use your common sense." Common sense. As if the world is common. As if bias doesn't wear a suit. As if fear doesn't sit in the jury box. The witness, a woman who had been terrified, who saw a man running and later saw Elias in a lineup, pointed at him and said, "That's him." But the lineup was a mess. Elias stood out, different height, different hair, different posture. A lineup built less to test memory and more to confirm an arrest. The defense tried. They asked about lighting, distance, stress, but the witness was sure. And when a witness is sure, jurors listen, because certainty feels like truth, even when it isn't. Elias didn't take the stand, not because he didn't want to speak, because his lawyer told him the jury might not believe him. Imagine that, being told that your own voice could hurt you, being told that silence is safer than your story. The jury came back with a verdict: guilty, first-degree murder, life, and in a courtroom filled with strangers, Elias looked back and saw Lorraine holding Marcus on her hip. His son's face was pressed against her shoulder, little hands clutching her blouse, not understanding why grown-ups were saying words that made his mother shake. Elias tried to mouth something, he didn't know what. "Sorry, I love you, remember me." It all felt too small. The deputies took him away, and the world outside kept moving. Marcus grew, seasons turned, presidents changed, and Elias Booker began living in a place where time doesn't feel like time. It feels like waiting. Quick question for you, watching. Where are you watching from? City, state, country? Drop it in the comments. And if stories like this matter to you, stories about power, bias, and the people who survive the cracks, hit like and subscribe. It tells the algorithm these cases deserve daylight, because what happens next is the part that most people never see, the part after the verdict, the part where the sentence becomes a life. Prison doesn't steal your days all at once, it steals them in inches, in routines, in gates and counts and meal lines, in the way the air smells like disinfectant and sweat, in the way your name turns into a number so gradually that one day you realize the number answers faster than your own voice. Elias arrived young, angry, still convinced that someone would see the mistake and fix it, because that's what you believe when you still believe the system is built to correct itself. Then the years began. The first decade was survival, learning who to avoid, learning when to speak, learning the brutal economy of respect behind bars. Elias worked in the laundry, then the kitchen, then the maintenance crew. He read everything he could get his hands on. History, Bible, old magazines with photos of cars that looked like spaceships compared to the ones he remembered. He watched the world shift through television screens mounted high in day rooms. Black and white became color. Civil rights marches became documentaries. Wars began and ended. Music changed. Slang changed. The hairstyles on TV became stranger and stranger, until one day, Elias realized that time was making him an outsider to the very language of the outside world. And through all of it, he wrote letters, at first to Lorraine, long letters about hope, about being strong, about Marcus. He asked what his son liked, what he wanted to be, if he was tall, if he still laughed. Lorraine wrote back at first, then less, not because she stopped loving him, because the world doesn't pause for incarcerated men. Bills don't pause. Loneliness doesn't pause. The pressure of raising a child alone doesn't pause. Their marriage frayed under a strain neither of them deserved. When Lorraine remarried, she didn't do it with cruelty. She did it with exhaustion. And she told Elias in a letter that shook his hands as he read it. "I can't keep living in a hallway," she wrote. "I need a room with a door." Elias understood. Understanding didn't make it hurt less, but it kept bitterness from turning into poison. Marcus still wrote, at first little drawings, crayon dinosaurs, stick figures, a house with a big sun over it. Then, as he got older, short notes. "Dad, I got an A. Dad, I made the team. Dad, I miss you." And then, in his teenage years, the letters changed again. They became angrier, because boys become men in a world that keeps asking them to do it without guidance. "Why you not here?" Marcus wrote once. Elias stared at that line for a long time. How do you explain to a teenager that you are caged, not because you did something, but because someone decided you did? How do you ask for patience from a child whose childhood is being drained by the same injustice? Elias wrote back anyway. "I'm still your father," he wrote, "and I'm still fighting." That was the truth. He was fighting. But he was fighting with the tools available to a man inside a cage. Law library, petitions, appeals, requests, all denied. All dismissed, all stamped with the same cold message, final. And over time, final starts to feel like a sentence all its own. There were moments when Elias almost broke. A riot in the yard that turned the air into smoke and screaming. A friend stabbed over a debt that should have been a conversation. A lockdown so long he forgot what moving freely felt like. There were funerals he couldn't attend. His mother died. He held the letter like it was a stone. His father died. He didn't cry at first. He went numb. Then the tears came in the shower where no one could see. And still, he kept one ritual. Every year, on Marcus's birthday, he wrote a letter. Even when Marcus stopped responding. Even when the mail came back. Even when silence became the loudest sound in his life. Because writing was proof he still existed. It was proof he hadn't surrendered to the idea that he was just a mistake that the system buried. Decades passed, and then, quietly, something changed. Not inside the prison, outside. The country began to talk, finally, about wrongful convictions, about eyewitness error, about coerced confessions, about prosecutors who hid evidence, about police departments that measured success in clearance rates, not truth. And in that new conversation, organizations formed. Law students took on cases, innocence clinics, non-profits, people who treated old files like living wounds. Elias's case file was thick, dusty, and almost forgotten. Almost. A young attorney named Nadia Reyes found it during a review of long-term incarceration cases. She didn't start with emotion, she started with questions. Why was the eyewitness identification so confident? Why didn't the defense challenge the lineup more aggressively? Why did the detective's notes have gaps? Why was there mention of a fingerprint at the scene, yet no fingerprint evidence introduced at trial? She requested records, then more, and when she finally sat across from Elias in the prison visiting room, glass between them, phones pressed to their ears, she saw something the file didn't capture. A man who had aged into his own patience, a man whose eyes were tired but still sharp. "Mr. Booker," Nadia said, "I can't promise anything, but I think something is off." Elias nodded slowly. "Everything was off," he replied. She didn't smile. "I mean on paper," she said, "in the evidence." Elias leaned forward. "I've been waiting for someone to care what's on paper," he said. Nadia dug, and digging is dangerous when the truth is buried on purpose. She found an old report that wasn't turned over to the defense, an early statement from a different witness who described the suspect as significantly taller than Elias. She found a note that suggested another man, an older man with a history of violence, had been seen near the store that night. She found the missing fingerprint reference. Then she found the most important thing of all, a property log showing that evidence from the crime scene had been collected and stored, including a piece of clothing with biological material. Biological material. In the 1960s, that meant nothing. In the modern world, it meant DNA. The prison didn't want to help, the state didn't want to reopen. The prosecutor's office responded with delay after delay, because admitting a wrongful conviction doesn't just free one man. It threatens a whole narrative. It threatens careers. It threatens the illusion that the system is always right. But Nadia kept pushing, court motions, public records, pressure. And after months that felt like years, she got an order. Testing allowed. Elias didn't celebrate. He didn't dare. Hope, for a man like him, was a knife you learned to hold carefully. The DNA results came back. Not a match. Not Elias. Someone else. Someone whose name had been in the system for years. Someone who had never been held accountable for the crime that stole Elias Booker's life. When Nadia told him, Elias didn't speak right away. He just sat there, phone against his ear, eyes fixed on a point beyond her shoulder. After a long silence, he whispered, "So I really been in here for nothing." Nadia's voice softened. "For nothing," she said. "Do you think you could forgive after that? If your entire adult life was taken by a lie, would you still know how to live without anger? Tell me what you think in the comments, because Elias wasn't done with anger yet. He was just about to aim it at the right place. The legal process didn't move like a rescue. It moved like a negotiation with a machine that hates admitting mistakes. A motion to vacate, a hearing, arguments. The state tried to defend the conviction anyway. They questioned the DNA. They questioned procedures. They questioned time, as if time itself could turn innocence into guilt. But the evidence wasn't just DNA. It was the suppressed report, the flawed lineup, the pattern. And when the judge finally spoke, the courtroom held its breath. "Mr. Booker's conviction is hereby vacated," the judge said. "The charges are dismissed." dismissed, a word that should have been said 58 years ago. Elias sat in a holding cell afterward, waiting for paperwork. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He thought it would feel like light. Instead, it felt like vertigo, because the world he was about to enter wasn't the world he left, and because the first thing he wanted to do, more than breathe fresh air, more than taste food not cooked by prison, was hold his son, a son who was already gone. Which brings us back to the door, to the guard, to the clipboard, to the sentence that changed everything. Sir, after 58 years, your release is granted. You're free to go. Elias stepped through the gate with a small plastic bag of possessions, letters, a worn Bible, a few photos, a pair of glasses. Outside, the air was cold, not prison cold, real cold, wind on skin. The sun, bright in a way fluorescent lights can never mimic. A few reporters waited behind a line, a couple of advocates, Nadia, and a woman holding a folded program in her hands, like it was fragile. Lorraine, older now, hair grey, eyes heavier. But when she saw him, the years didn't disappear. They simply paused. She stepped forward. Elias didn't run. His body didn't know how. He walked like a man learning the ground. They stood in front of each other, and all the words that could have existed over 58 years collapsed into nothing. Lorraine's voice came out thin. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Elias swallowed. "Ain't your fault," he said. Then, because life has a cruel sense of timing, the guard delivered the other sentence. "Your son wanted to be here today, but he passed last winter." Elias felt his knees soften. "My boy's gone?" Lorraine nodded, tears rising. "He held on as long as he could," she said. "He used to say, he just wanted you to see him grown." Elias's mouth opened, but no sound came. A man can survive prison, but grief like that is a different kind of sentence. "He was 5 when they took me," Elias whispered again, as if saying it twice could force the universe to correct itself. Lorraine reached for his hand. He let her, and in that moment, Elias Booker realized the true cost of wrongful imprisonment isn't just years. It's milestones, birthdays, graduations, first heartbreak, first job, fatherhood, funerals, all the places your love should have lived. The next weeks were a blur. Re-entry is a word people say like it's a program, like it's a checklist, like a man can step out after 58 years and simply adjust. Elias didn't know how to use a smartphone. He didn't understand debit cards. He stared at cars in parking lots like they were from another planet. He flinched at automatic doors. He woke up at 4 a.m. for count that didn't exist. He ate too fast. He sat with his back to walls. And every time he saw a little boy in a grocery store aisle, something in his chest twisted, because Marcus had been 5, and now Marcus was ashes. There was a funeral service Elias attended, not for a body, there had already been one, but for closure. A church hall, family members he didn't recognize, a granddaughter, grown, who looked at him with eyes that carried both curiosity and inherited grief. She stood in front of him and said, "I'm Tiana. I'm your son's daughter." Elias's hands trembled. "I didn't know," he managed. Tiana nodded. "He didn't talk about it much," she said, "but he kept every letter you sent. Every one." She pulled a small bundle of envelopes from her bag, yellowed paper, prison stamps, time sealed inside glue. Elias touched them like they might disappear. "I was there," he whispered. Tiana's eyes filled. "You were," she said, "just not the way you deserved." While Elias tried to learn the outside world, lawyers were still fighting the inside. Because even after exoneration, the state has choices. It can apologize, it can compensate, or it can deny, delay, and defend itself like the truth is an enemy. Elias filed a civil rights lawsuit, wrongful conviction, malicious prosecution, failure to disclose evidence, the kind of case that forces institutions to answer questions they've spent decades avoiding. Depositions happened. Old detectives, retired, older, softer around the edges, were asked about notes they barely remembered. Prosecutors' files were examined. Emails didn't exist back then, but memos did, and in those memos were the quiet choices, the missing witness statement, the evidence log, the ignored alternate suspect, the kind of misconduct that rarely comes with someone announcing, "I am doing something wrong." It comes with convenience, with shortcuts, with pressure, with bias so normalized it feels like procedure. The state understood the risk. If the case went to trial, a jury would hear about 58 years. They would see a photograph of a 19-year-old boy and then look at the elderly man sitting at counsel table. They would hear about a son who died waiting. And juries, when they see time stolen that cleanly, sometimes punish hard. So the state did what institutions often do when they're cornered. It negotiated, mediation, offers, counter-offers, language, no admission, confidentiality clauses, and then the number, $9.2 million. It wasn't framed as an apology, it was framed as a settlement, a way to close a file, but money speaks its own truth. $9.2 million says this wasn't a misunderstanding. It says someone, somewhere, knew a jury would be furious. It says the state wanted the story to end quietly. Elias signed, not because the number felt like justice, because nothing can feel like justice after 58 years. He signed because he needed stability, he needed medical care, he needed a home, he needed therapy he never asked for, but clearly carried. And because he understood something else. If he didn't take care of the life he had left, the state would steal that too, just in a different way. People asked him the obvious question. Are you angry? Elias would pause, because anger is simple. It's the easiest emotion to reach for when the world has been cruel. What Elias felt was more complicated. He was angry, yes, but he was also hollow in places. He was also grateful to breathe. He was also furious at how late truth can arrive. He was also tired. And sometimes, late at night, he was afraid. Afraid to love what time had left. Afraid to trust freedom. Afraid that the universe could still pull the rug. He started speaking at events, not as a celebrity, as a warning. He'd stand in front of a room and say, "I'm not a miracle story, I'm a math problem." He would tell them what 58 years looks like, how your hands change, how your knees change, how your voice changes, how the world changes so much that your memories feel like artifacts. He'd talk about the witness, not with hatred, with sadness. People remember wrong, he'd say, and their job wasn't truth, he'd say, their job was a name. He'd talk about the prosecutor, and their job was to win. Then he'd say the line that always made the room go quiet. My son died waiting for me. And when he said it, you could feel everyone in the room understand something they'd never had to calculate. Wrongful conviction isn't just a legal error, it's a generational wound. If you were Elias, would you want the state to apologize publicly? Or would you want reforms that stop the next case? Because Elias didn't chase one perfect ending. He chased impact. The settlement money helped him survive. But the bigger fight was about what the case exposed. Evidence disclosure rules, lineup procedures, recording interrogations, independent review boards, and compensation laws that don't force innocent people to beg for scraps after a lifetime stolen. Some changes came. Not enough, never enough, but enough that Elias could look at the camera during an interview and say, if they had to record what they did to me, I might have been home in a year, not 60. In the end, what does freedom mean after 58 years? It's not just walking outside. It's learning how to choose. Choosing what to eat. Choosing what to wear. Choosing when to sleep. choosing silence, choosing music, choosing whether to open the blinds or keep them shut. Freedom, for Elias, came in small, almost embarrassing moments, sitting in a car with the window down, feeling wind, hearing people laugh without a steel door between him and sound, touching grass like it mattered, going to a grocery store and being overwhelmed by the cereal aisle, smiling at a child and not being watched like a threat. But freedom also came with a shadow, because every time he tasted something sweet, there was a bitter aftertaste. Marcus should have been here. Marcus should have been the one to drive him. Marcus should have been the one to hug him at the gate. Marcus should have been the one to say, "Dad, you're home." Instead, Elias stood at a grave with a hand on cold stone, and he spoke softly to a son who couldn't answer. "I'm sorry I'm late," he whispered. The words weren't rational, but grief isn't rational. He stayed there a long time. Then he turned away, because time, no matter how cruel, keeps moving. So here's the question this story leaves us with. What does a state owe a person after it steals their life? Is $9.2 million enough for 58 years? For missing your mother's last breath? For missing your father's funeral? For missing every birthday of your child? For stepping into freedom and hearing on the same day that the person you lived for is gone? Maybe you'll say no. Maybe you'll say no number can ever be enough. And you'd be right, because justice isn't supposed to be a payout. It's supposed to be prevention. It's supposed to be truth. It's supposed to be the system doing the hard work before it ruins somebody. Elias Booker walked out after 58 years. He got his name back, he got daylight, he got a check, but the story doesn't end clean. It ends honestly, with a man standing in the middle of a world that moved on without him, holding the weight of time in his hands, and proving something that should terrify all of us. If this can happen to him, it can happen to anyone. And the only reason we hear about cases like his is because someone kept digging. Someone kept asking. Someone refused to let a file stay closed. So the next time you hear someone talk about a conviction like it's automatically truth, remember Elias. Remember that a verdict can be wrong. Remember that certainty can be manufactured. Remember that final can be overturned. And remember that freedom, when it comes after a lifetime, isn't always a celebration. Sometimes it's a door cracking open and a man stepping through it, into a world that owes him everything and can only offer money. And still, he walks, because even late freedom is still a refusal to be buried by a lie.